Dennis, let's spend a few minutes talking about the pre-deposition setting up of the deposition itself. This sounds like a boring topic, but in a lot of ways it really sets the tone for what's going to happen in the rest of discovery. I've found that how a lawyer gets the depositions moving can have a really profound impact on the attitude of opposing counsel. If a lawyer simply notices a deposition without any attempt to contact opposing counsel and schedules the deposition in a manner which violates the written and unwritten rules of the community, it will start fights that don't need to occur and create both dissension, disruption, and demonstrate that the lawyer who is setting up the depositions doesn't have an intent to comply with the civility and professionalism that I believe most lawyers want to see. So let's just discuss what ought to be done, what the right way should be for setting a deposition. And what I suggest, despite the availability of modern technology, that rather than simply firing off electronically by email a notice of deposition or even an email suggesting potential dates, that the way to start setting depositions is to pick up the phone and to call opposing counsel, introduce yourself if you haven't otherwise done so, and try to work cooperatively with opposing counsel to establish the dates and times and places for the depositions that need to be taken. What I've done for years is call up opposing counsel and say that I'd like to have an informal scheduling conference. I offer to go to opposing counsel's office, bring my calendar, and sit down with opposing counsel and try to get all of the depositions in the case scheduled. And by doing so, that showing the opposing counsel that I'm willing to be accommodating and come to their office, I can, within a matter of a few minutes of meeting, avoid what might have become hours and hours of debate. And that scheduling conference also can be used as an opportunity to begin talking about some of the other issues of the case and might even begin to open the door for settlement discussions. If the opposing lawyer won't take the phone call, then you can schedule tentatively by email or letter suggested dates for the deposition. And then if you don't get a response to your email suggested dates or your letter suggested dates, then do the notice of deposition. Even at that point, when I send a notice of deposition, having not heard back from opposing counsel, I will usually accompany it with an email or letter that says that these are the dates that I've selected, the places that I have picked, but certainly I am willing to discuss modifications of the schedule, including time and place, as might be necessary to accommodate either the witnesses or opposing counsel.
Yeah, I think that particularly in light of the enduring interest of the American College of Trial Lawyers in promoting professionalism and civility, it's entirely appropriate to be talking about this subject. And I agree completely that the tone for the litigation is often struck in not even at the first deposition, but before the first deposition, when you're talking about working out schedules. I have on occasion, both with respect to depositions and other things, told the other lawyer that I'll walk over to your office. And I like to do it in the other lawyer's office because I think it shows a certain courtesy to him or to her. And I used to say to the other lawyer, the meeting takes place in the senior lawyer's office, so I'll walk over there. And now I tell people that there's nothing here but work. I'd like to get out of here, so I'll walk to your office.
I want to get some fresh air.
And very often, if there's going to be jousting ahead of time or questions raised or whatever, they concern the subjects of starting times, of the place of the deposition, and of how long it will run. And I often refer to one case I handled some years ago where I served a notice for a deposition of a fellow on the other side, the first deposition in the case, for 9 o'clock in the morning in my office in Philadelphia to run from day to day until complete. And I got a phone call from my opponent who said all of that was fine, except he wanted to start at 10, and he wanted to do it at the defendant's place of business in New York City, and that we would have to recess at 1 because the witness had to fly to the West Coast. And he said, you're going to find out this guy doesn't know nearly as much as you think he does, and I think he'll be done by 1, but if you're not, we'll bring him back. So, are you going to fight about this or not? You could postpone it. You can do a dozen different things. And I just decided, fine. Some people don't like to be playing on the other side's home court. I think you can convey the message that I'm sufficiently confident about my case and about my abilities that playing on your home court doesn't bother me a lick. And we ended up in that case with 50 or 60 depositions taken, a bunch of requests for paper discovery. There wasn't a single discovery motion filed on either side. And I really believe that it went back to that phone call. And by the way, my opponent was right. I was done by 12:30, and that was the beginning and the end of it. But naturally, it's not just that deposition. From that point on, there are accommodations on both sides that make your life easier.
I think it's important for new practitioners to recognize that in addition to the written rules relating to depositions, there are a lot of unwritten rules of practice in most communities about this subject of how depositions are taken and scheduled. So, for example, the issue that Dennis just raised about where the deposition will be, almost every community in the United States has a rule of practice as to whether a individual's deposition will be taken in the individual's place of business or in the witness's lawyer's office or in the office of the lawyer who will be taking the deposition. And rather than starting off with a fight over that issue, find out what the rules of practice are, what the traditions and customs are in your community, and either comply with those rules of practice or reach a new agreement relating to the case. The other issue that Dennis raised relating to discussing the place of the deposition may very well be that what the parties will do is establish a rule for the case. So even though there may not be a written rule, or even if there is a community rule, very frequently what the parties will agree to is a rule for the case, so that all of the witnesses will be deposed at the place of their business, not only in this first deposition, but as Dennis suggested, maybe in the 50 depositions that would follow. Or that there would be a standing assumption that the depositions would be taken in the office of the attorney that represented that witness. So try to avoid disputes rather than create them. Disputes are extraordinarily expensive for our clients and create delay and make the practice a lot less enjoyable. And you'll find that by being accommodating, offering accommodation, and trying to raise and resolve issues in advance, most of these problems could be taken care of before they become problems.
A useful analogy, perhaps, that I've sometimes used with new lawyers, and my sons think this is hysterical, but I've suggested to them that you should think of it a little bit like dating. If some nephew or niece asked you, what are the rules of dating? You would say, well, I can tell you what often happens, what the format is, but the truth of the matter is that there are no rules, and the date ends up to be what the participants choose to make it. And I think the same is true of a deposition or a series of depositions. I don't think you want to be locked into any one right way to do things in your mind, but rather to be flexible and to do what makes sense. And, keep in mind JFK's admonition that civility is not a sign of weakness.
That dating analogy can be taken to its extreme. Like any date, it would be a really horrible outcome of the date if you have to get a court involved in resolving the disputes. It's really a shame when you have to get a court involved to resolve disputes relating to depositions. The vast majority of the time, parties acting appropriately can work out these kinds of issues without ever having to get a court involved.